Looking back on the week that was and forward to the week ahead, it's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Waiver wire, trades, roster management. To win in fantasy football, you must remember one simple rule. Never get out-hustled. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwain McFarland.
And it is the Fantasy Football Hustle. I'm your host, Brian Drake from FightingChanceFantasy.com. Joined as always by my main man, Dwain McFarland of Establish the Run, MattWaldmanRSP.com, FootballGuy.com. Can you add like 6 more sites that you work for, Dwain, to make this intro longer?
I'm working on it, you know. I mean, no. I think I'm tapped out.
Well, welcome in, everybody. This is the Fantasy Football Hustle. We are members of the FulltimeFantasy.com podcast network. Thanks for joining us. Check us out on Twitter at FF Hustle. You can check us out now on Facebook. Search us there at the Fantasy Football Hustle podcast. And check us out on YouTube. Search the same name. Dwain and I are, as always, on Twitter at Drake Fantasy, at Dwain McFarland. What a crazy week here, Dwain. And if you ran into Aaron Jones, Christian McCaffrey, Will Fuller, Eagles defense, Amari Cooper, like, you almost had no shot, right? What a wild week where some guys put up some monster digits.
Drake, in one of my high-stakes leagues, I had Aaron Jones, Christian McCaffrey, and Amari Cooper. No lie.
You had them all.
I lost.
Oh.
I played the dude that had Will Fuller. He had DJ Chark, Cooper Kupp. What killed me was OJ Howard. There's nobody on the wire. You know how those leagues are. It's insane. So, I mean, I'm just stuck with OJ Howard and my freaking 2 points. And then I had Wayne Gallman in one of my flex spots. And so he got hurt early in the game. So anyway, I scored like 215 points, which is insane in that format. Actually, it was over 220, and I lost, I think, by 7 points.
I beat my arch rival, my home league. He had McCaffrey. He had Fuller. But Eagles D, Matt Ryan, Amari Cooper, that all bailed me out here. So, folks, in week 6, if you're struggling, don't throw the towel in. It's not over with yet. You know, we can get you back to good. I started a league where I was 0-2. Now I'm 3-2, and I'm fighting for the first place in the division here. We've got bye weeks, Dwain. Bears, Bills, Colts, Raiders. There's some players there that are going to be sitting out. We got to find replacements for them. Let's be honest, folks. I'm not going to bullshit you here.
Hopefully you don't own too many people from those teams.
Yeah. And there's not great stuff on the wire, guys. There's really not. We'll hit some of the high points here. But roster construction, you should have hopefully some depth on your roster, and maybe we can find some guys throughout the show here that you can go after via a trade. One thing we're going to do today is I'm going to bounce some guys off Dwain who are maybe underachieving or fantasy players out there are worried about, and I want to see what Dwain's utilization reports say about them and where we go from them in the future. So let's just kick it off on the waiver wire, Dwain. If you're hurting at running back, say you're starting Marlon Mack and Josh Jacobs, you need somebody to fill in here. Well, let's start with David Johnson and his back injury. So if he's down for any period of time, and he had to sit out a little bit during this game, Chase Edmonds is an intriguing option for Arizona.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, if David Johnson's out, Chase Edmonds becomes, easily an RB2, with RB1 upside, for the week. I mean, it's just David Johnson, it's all about volume. He's on a team that runs a ton of plays. His efficiency hasn't been great, but it's gotten better over the last few weeks. But the team just runs, the volume is so good. And they use the running backs in the passing game. And I would expect that to continue for Chase Edmonds as well. This last week, whenever Johnson, was hurt, that's kind of how Edmonds relieved him. He ran 39% routes per drop back versus 47% for David Johnson, which he had been at an 82 and a 79% in the weeks before. So while David Johnson's rushing attempts really didn't fall, a ton from a percentage standpoint, this last week, that was really how Edmonds came in and helped spell him. And we know that Edmonds is a solid receiver. So yeah, Chase Edmonds is an absolute must own if David Johnson is out of the lineup.
There's a game Thursday night in Foxborough, and it's not going to be pretty, folks. Patriots, Giants. Word is coming out that basically all of the Giants are taking the night off. Okay. So Barkley's not going to play. Gallman's not going to be cleared. Do we dare throw Jonathan Hillman into a roster out there?
Not versus the Patriots. I mean, the Patriots they're not going to give anything up to Hillman, in my opinion, with all of these other options potentially out. You got Evan Ingram with an MCL sprain, so it's looking like he's not going to be able to go. You get Sterling Shepard, like you said, with the concussions. So, I mean, really all you have is Golden Tate and Daniel Jones. How the Patriots do. They take away your best option. When all you have are those two, they're going to easily eliminate, everything. I wouldn't doubt it if the Giants don't score a point.
Darius Slayton season, folks.
Yeah, good luck. Good luck. Good luck with that.
How about any 49er running back that may have been dropped? And when I say any, I mean Tevin Coleman and Matt Breida. What an ass whooping last night they laid on the Browns. And, man, they looked like they were just exploding through the hole. These guys were crushing it last night. Now, the three of them, when throwing Raheem Mostert, split the carries way too much. And it worries me as a Matt Breida owner that, he did get 11 carries for $140 or $114 and a touchdown. But if he's only going to be seeing 30% of the snaps, Dwain, I'm scared crapless here.
Yeah, if you can sell one of those guys, great. Here's the problem. We've already seen what happens when someone gets hurt, right? So the hope around Matt Breida was he's the most talented back on the team, so that would give him an avenue to becoming the number one guy in a Shanahan, led scheme, which clearly we can see is awesome. Now we're going to have to watch this college Juszczyk injury. He is a key to that is the one thing that Booger actually got right, on the game last night. But anyway, my cousin Booger from the family reunion, Drake, thanks for that tweet.
What's going on there?
Yeah. Anyway, inside joke. But with Breida, we felt that he was the better running back than Tevin Coleman coming into the season. He's in a great scheme, but we've already seen what happens when Tevin Coleman goes down. It just continues to be a split. And so Breida last night got the same number of, from a percentage standpoint, was really right in line with where he's been all of the season. He had 29% of the team attempts, and that's right exactly where he's been. He hovers around the 30, to 35% mark. Tevin Coleman saw 42%. Of the attempts. So he actually was the leader, last night, but he wasn't able to get to 50%. And, his upside's kind of capped because then, when they're blowing somebody out, Raheem Mostert comes in and he gets 18%, and that's most of that was in garbage time. But that's the same thing we saw, 2 weeks ago with Jeff Wilson. Remember that, Drake? Whenever we saw Breida and Mostert both have solid games, but both of them were capped because by the time the 49ers were out to a big lead, it was Jeff Wilson. So it's the same thing. I think this year, Shanahan, one has been snake bitten by trying to depend too much on a runner, on a certain runner in his scheme. He knows that, injuries can happen. So I think he feels better just to use all of them. Right. And number two, it's working. Why does he really need to change it? I don't see a reason. The real problem here is the third guy, Drake. If it was just two, we could manage. But when you get into these blowout situations, which is when you want to own these runners, they immediately are capped because they freaking he just grabs the emergency brake and just yanks it. He shoves the other guy in and lets him get out there. I think what we could see, and we can't always predict this, is in more competitive game scripts, we could see it just be more about Tevin Coleman and Matt Breida, which would be nice. The positive for Breida was he did get a look inside or right at the 5-yard line last night. Now it was in the passing game and he caught a touchdown on it, last night. So he hadn't seen that the whole season leading up to this point. So that was positive for Breida, but it's like you said, you're fine owning a piece of this. You just have to limit your expectations, because your floor is, 7 to 8 points, in a PPR. And your ceiling, rather than getting a 30, is really more like a 20 because, if they jump out to a big lead, you're just not going to see these guys stay on the field. The only way you see a higher ceiling than that is if we see a game where, more teams manage to keep the game close with the 49ers, but the 49ers are still able to do most of their work on the ground.
Two guys just to check on your wire, see if they're out there. Carlos Hyde, he's had 55 plus yards, points, good Lord. 55 plus yards in 4 of his 5 games. And Ronald Jones, still not seeing any targets. Guy's got 6 whole targets on the year, but he was, he's trying to take over this lead spot. And let's just circle back to Ronald Jones because we've talked about him seemingly for 5 years on this show. What did you see from him this week in your utilization reports? Did he distance himself at all from Peyton Barber, or is this still just a disastrous mess?
No, it's still just a disaster. I do believe he's taken the slight edge, but when you have three backs, if Ogunbowale wasn't in the mix, Drake, that would help, but he is. And so if you looked at it this last week from a snap percentage standpoint, it's Barber 34, Jones 33, Ogunbowale 33%, rush attempts 36% for Barber. Ronald Jones was at 41%, so he led again. But Peyton Barber got the one carry inside of the 5. Ronald Jones didn't have any, and Peyton Barber happened to score. So it's a real mess, Drake. It's not something that you can depend on. You're literally, just hoping for the best anytime you put one of these guys in the lineup until something else happens as far as utilization. We need, Ronald Jones is a guy that in deeper leagues, I'm going to hold him. Medium-sized leagues, I may hold him depending on what's out there. But in shallower leagues, you just shouldn't have Barber, Jones, Ogunbowale. None of these guys should be on your roster. Most people probably have moved on by this point anyway, just based on the production. So it's probably not an issue. But yeah, it's just a situation, Drake, where until something happens, either it's an injury to one of these guys, which, we don't want to hope for, a player to be injured. But what I'm trying to say is something else has to change here. Something has to give before we can trust any of these guys.
Let's move on to wide receiver now. And Mohamed Sanu, we mentioned him last week, but he kind of went off again. 5 catches, 42 yards, and a touchdown. Guy has double-digit PPR points in 4 of his 5 games. They got the Cardinals next week. Now, let's kind of bring him into a overall Falcons conversation here, because I've got your utilization report up on Dwain's Twitter, at Dwain McFarland. Julio Jones, 3 catches, 42 yards. He's now gone under 60 yards back-to-back weeks. He's only got 14 targets the last 2 weeks total. I get the line is bad, but they're throwing the ball a ton. Ryan's putting up big-time points. What the hell's going on in Atlanta?
Yeah, Julio's eventually going to come around. The big number, like the eye-popping number is, what his target share for the year is? It's 19%. That's terrible. So 19%, for what we're used to from Julio, you're used to 28, 27, 30%. He had 26% in week 3, but the last 2 weeks, he's only been targeted 13% of the time. What's really going on here, Drake, is they're rotating all of these guys. And this is the new thing that we're seeing in the league. The Ravens started doing it last year, and we told people about it. And, there are multiple teams now that are doing this. The Titans are doing this. The Falcons are doing this. Even the Eagles to some extent have been doing this. The Colts are doing this. We're just seeing it. We used to just see running back by committee. Now we're seeing more and more receiver by committee. This makes absolutely no sense with a guy like Julio Jones. But if you look at it, Drake, his routes per drop back under 80% this last week. His snaps are 75% for the season. Calvin Ridley's 75%. Mohamed Sanu's 82%. So, Austin Hooper's 82%. So they're all right there. And they let these guys, Justin Hardy and Russell Gage, are getting 17% and 17%. That's the part I don't get. Why? Yeah. Just eliminate Justin Hardy and Russell Gage from the freaking mix and just be done with it, and let Sanu and Ridley and Jones and Hooper all go eat. Now, I know part of it is they're trying to keep these guys healthy. They're trying to keep them fresh. Newsflash, Falcons, you suck. You should probably get your best players on the field. I know there are a lot of things that go into that decision-making process, but that little stuff just adds up, Drake, over time. The good news is, the Falcons are dropping back to pass 74% of the time. That's one of the highest in the league. So even with some time going away to the other players, based on, their tempo, which is 2.2 plays a minute, which is very solid, and then the fact that they're throwing the ball so much, Julio Jones is going to get his. He's a great buy low, guy. But just we're not seeing, those 85. Used to, the way they would rest Jones, Drake, is we would see 85 to 90% of the snaps. But this 75% thing, that means certain weeks he's not even on the field for 80% of Matt Ryan's dropbacks. You're missing a fifth of the time that Matt Ryan drops back to pass. Julio Jones isn't out there. That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense at all. But what that's done is, by him not being on the field, it's turned this attack really into, let's spread it around across 4 or 5 guys, right? There's nobody on this team that's jumping up at a 25, 24, 23% target share. You've got Austin Hooper at 18%. You've got Julio Jones at 19%. You've got Calvin Ridley at 14%. And you've got Mohamed Sanu at 16%.
I'm a Julio owner, and I'm kind of like come on here, buddy. Let's see why I took you in the early second round.
Real quick while we're on Atlanta, just one thing I would say is if you are a Devonta Freeman owner, it really might be the time to sell. His PPR fantasy points are up. You've seen him score 13, 18, and 18 over the last 3 weeks. However, if you look at the way the Falcons are playing, and so they've lost by 3, 14, and 21, and then you look closer, Freeman's snap rates have gone down from 90 to 62 to 55. And remember that 90% week was the week Ito Smith had a concussion and he missed most of the game. Rushing attempts have gone down from 80% to 71% to 55%. His actual attempts, themselves have gone down from 16 to 12 to 11. His routes per dropback, Drake, down from 82% to 47% to 39%. All this time, Ito Smith's going up in every one of these categories. And so Freeman is kind of outproducing, really, what he's kind of been fortunate the last couple of weeks to manage to even get to an 18 points. Now, this is a guy that we were big on in the preseason, but the biggest reason is I thought the Falcons would be better, right? And I didn't see Ito Smith getting this much work. I'm just going to be honest. No, Drake, Ito Smith has 67% of the team attempts from inside the 5. Freeman has 17%. So Freeman's a mess. You can't depend on his team. You can't depend on how much he's going to get used, and he's not in there on high leverage situations, which are your opportunities to score touchdowns. So Devonta Freeman, if you can move him, especially if you're in a league where it's tough to move position for position, right? Like runner for runner, that stuff, it's tough to do. Maybe you can find the right deal, but if you can find an owner in your league that, has a receiver that you could use and he's hurting at running back, now's the time to go look at moving Devonta Freeman and try to sell him high. He hasn't blown up or anything, but I think a lot of owners will still see the name value and they're like, 18 and 18 points, that's not bad considering how bad some folks are hurting at runner.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just looking at the buys here. Next week is another 4-team buy. You're going to get Panthers, Browns, Steelers, Bucks. A lot of receivers there. So this could be the week to go out and maybe move Devonta Freeman before next week when that guy realizes like, oh crap, I need all these receivers. So we're cruising through the wide receivers on the waiver wire that you might want to add for week 6. Again, it's not great. We're not, giving you names that are going to win you your league necessarily. A hot name last week was Auden Tate. He did play 100% of the snaps for the Bengals, dropped a touchdown, ended up catching one, only 3 for 26 on a touchdown. John Ross, though, is to IR. This is a horrible team with a really bad offensive line. I don't know how much you want to be invested in it, Dwain, if we want to tell our listeners to go out and get guys in this crap show. But Auden Tate's out there if you need a guy playing 100% of snaps.
Yeah, the positives are the snaps, and he ran a route on 97% of dropback. So, that's number 2 on the team behind Tyler Boyd, which is at 100%. His targets have been 22%, 16%, and 16%. So this is a guy they were getting involved even before John Ross was hurt. So that is a positive, is that he's somebody that they saw fit to receive more targets even before the injury, and then now he's just getting more because of the injury. The thing that I like about him the most, Drake, is he's sitting at 38% of their end zone targets for the year. That's tied with Tyler. Tied with Tyler Eifert. So he is going to see some high leverage situations. If you're hurting, in a bye week situation, or if you are in a deeper league, Auden Tate, should be owned. He was probably picked up in a lot of deeper leagues even last week. But he is a guy that, it's like you said, this offense is terrible. But until AJ Green comes back, he and Tyler Boyd are the top 2 options. I mean, so I would anticipate in PPR, he has about a 10-point PPR floor, and he might hit you, a 20-point week, 1 out of 3 weeks, because he's going to catch a touchdown.
We had a trade go off in the NFL this week. Let's celebrate. Woo!
All right. Mine's
Cheers.
already cracked. So yeah. I got the high life, Drake. What do you got over there?
I've got the low life.
So fitting.
Yeah. Evil Twin Low Life. Fantastic beer. So trade went down. The Buffalo Bills, speaking of low life, it's nice. Hey, I live in upstate New York.
Bills Mafia.
I can make that joke. I live in Syracuse. So the Bills ended up trading Zay Jones to the Raiders, which will open up things for a guy no one's ever heard of before this week, Duke Williams. So let's examine both sides of this trade now, Dwain. Duke Williams is a guy who came in. He played 50 snaps against the Titans. They got the Ravens this week. They just lost Tony Jefferson at safety. Kid looks like a player, I guess. Zay Jones on the other side, guy only has 7 catches all season, but he's going to get new life on the opposite side of Tyrell Williams with the Raiders. What do you think of this deal?
Yeah, this was something we saw actually in the preseason where Duke Williams started to supplant Zay Jones, and it kind of stalled out a little bit to start this season. And now we see Zay Jones moved on. This last week, Duke Williams ran a route on 80% of the dropbacks, where Zay Jones had dropped down to 2%, and Duke Williams saw 13% of the targets. So, I really don't want to own anything outside of John Brown, to be honest, in Buffalo in the passing attack. Second is still going to be Cole Beasley. But, you were super excited about Beasley last week, 28 and 27% of the targets, and he fell on his face with 13% this last week. And that's the danger with this passing attack, is when you hit a week like that, because their volume, is a bit lower, they've got, because of the quarterback inconsistencies that they have going on, it can be an issue. And so for me, Duke Williams, I'm not messing with Duke Williams, even in the very deepest of deep leagues. But Zay Jones is a guy that has a little bit of interest to me. Again, he's not a guy I'm rushing out to grab, but the Raiders need somebody, Trey. Tyrell Williams is fighting a different injury every single week. Darren Waller can't do everything on his own. We know Josh Jacobs is helping to lead that ground game, but Zay Jones, last year before his injury was doing pretty good, with Josh Allen. And, he's a good fit for a West Coast type offense, a less vertical style of offense. And I think that's going to be a good thing, for him. He'll fill into the Z role. And you'll have Tyrell Williams hopefully getting back healthy and able to play X. And I think that will help. Again, not a person I'm rushing out to grab, but I wouldn't be surprised to see, Zay Jones, command 15 to 20%, of the targets on a weekly basis, and a not very good offense in Oakland. So if you're in a super deep league, you can consider it.
Every offense we talk about here today is garbage.
Well, it's half the league this year, Drake, with all the quarterback stuff. I mean, this is a bad offensive year. I mean, think about it. I mean, there's touchdowns and things being scored, but if you look at really the overall picture, you zoom out and you look at, the quality of overall offenses, it's down.
Yeah. One offense that was down this week from what we're used to, and that's Kansas City Chiefs. And one of our friend of the show, Matt Waldman's boys, Byron Pringle, went off 6 for 103 and a touchdown on 9 targets. I know he talked him up a little in the preseason. Any chance you're adding Byron Pringle this week off the wire?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would put Byron Pringle above a lot of the names that we're hearing. Here's the reason why. We know Sammy Watkins. Yeah,
I'm just making waiver wire moves. We're live on the
air. Well, Sammy Watkins is potentially going to miss the game, and we still don't know where Tyreek Hill sits. So really, with Pringle, as far as this week is concerned, in the short term, he's got some he's got some viable paths to volume. He's got some options there. If Tyreek Hill doesn't play, he's going to be on the field. If Sammy Watkins doesn't play, he's going to be on the field. If you look at him this last week, he played 77% of the snaps, 76% routes per dropback. Those things both surpassed Mecole Hardman, and he rewarded the team, with better play. He was 27% of the team's air yards, this last week. He's basically really their only option outside of Travis Kelce. So yeah, Byron Pringle is absolutely a guy that, I at least want to have on my roster if I can, especially in deeper leagues, or if I've got an issue with a bye week coming. Now, I may not end up getting to use him if suddenly Sammy Watkins and Tyreek Hill are going to be, active. That's going to be a problem for us. But given the fact that Sammy Watkins was downgraded to, a limited practice last Friday with a shoulder issue, and now he's got a hamstring issue, I think there's a good shot that Byron Pringle plays in Sammy Watkins' stead this weekend.
Going up against the Texans, and their secondary isn't what it used to be. So good shot. He could do some things there. Thanks to everybody joining us on Periscope and our YouTube channel. We love it. We've got a bunch of you in here right now, people talking in the chat room. And we actually have a question, Dwain, before we switch over to tight end. One of our listeners wants to know any tendencies for the interim coach for the Redskins. I believe that's Bill Callahan.
You know what? That's a great question. I have information on Callahan. I'll have to go back and look, though. I don't have it, right here in front of me. So great question. I unfortunately just don't have an answer right off the top of my head.
Here, I'll break it down for you. He wants to run the ball. Their offensive line stinks. Their running back is 75 years old. The team's garbage. That's all you need to know about the Redskins.
The team is terrible.
Yeah, and hopefully they trade their left tackle here this week if they had any brains at all and wanted to get some picks. If you're the Browns or Patriots,
Callahan is, he's a guy that has always leaned more towards the run. He's worked as an offensive line coach in multiple places. What do offensive linemen want to do? You've got bad quarterbacks. I mean, I probably don't even need to go look further than what you just said, Drake. I think you probably nailed it. They want to run, but will they be able to? Now, they might be able to this week because they get the Dolphins, Drake. It's the battle of the two worst teams.
Let's say you've got Darren Waller. He's on bye, or you're trying to get by one of these Colts guys, whatever. You need a tight end this week. Boy, how about the show Gerald Everett put on Thursday night for the Rams? A guy you've talked about, Dwain, for a while now is a breakout candidate. 7 for 136 on 11 targets. Over the past 2 weeks, he's got 19 targets, 12 catches, $180, and a touchdown. If you need a tight end, Gerald Everett may be the A1 option on the waiver. If you need anything this week, I think Everett's going to be the first guy off the board.
Yeah, I mean, Everett's a guy that, you're going to have to put a bid on. I'm still concerned about him, though. I like him as a talent. Here's my concern. You've got Cooper Kupp. You've got Robert Woods. We'll see what goes on with Brandon Cooks, if he's able to get back to full speed this week. But even with Cooks out last week, Josh Reynolds stepped in. You've got Todd Gurley. This is getting to be an offense where, man, Drake, there are a lot of mouths to feed here. And I just think each week – there's no way for Gerald Everett to continue unless one of these other guys are the odd man out.
It's all Cooper Kupp. It never stops.
And here's the problem with guess what happened to Cooper Kupp last week? His snaps dropped to 66%, routes per dropback lowest of the season, 84%. Why? Because when Gerald Everett's on the field in 12, they're not in 11, and Cooper Kupp's off the field.
Ooh.
Yeah, so, I mean, there are greater ramifications here. Now, Kupp still led the team with 33% of the targets because he and Goff are simpatico. That's Goff's dude.
Absolutely.
They've done the roommate thing. It's on and on and on. They love each other. They might as well just, kiss before the game and, get it over with. But there is an issue here. You can't continue to feed all these guys. So either what's going to happen is if Gerald Everett proves to be worthy of continuing to be considered like this, which he was, think about it. This was Sean McVay's first pick as, with the Rams, whenever he took over 3 years ago. So he is a guy that, Sean McVay likes, but if that's the case, something has to give somewhere. That either means Robert Woods, Brandon Cooks, or Cooper Kupp isn't getting theirs. And I think a lot of weeks it's still going to be Gerald Everett not getting his. So Everett is a guy you are going to have to put a bid on. He is a guy that's definitely worth owning. I would just temper expectations about what you're getting. My gut tells me that you're going to be riding a roller coaster. Here's his snaps the last 3 weeks, Drake, 88%, 56%, 81%. Here's his routes per dropback, 62%, 54%, 72%. Now his targets have gone from 5 to 10 to 20, but I think what you're going to have is game plan specific stuff going on here. So if they think that the tight end is the best mismatch, you're going to probably see more Everett that week and maybe less from the outside guys. But if they think that it's something where, that's not where the mismatch is at, or the game script is going away, in a way that they didn't really intend for it to, then I think that's a situation where you're going to see less Everett. So just be ready. He's definitely, like I said, worth owning, but he's going to be a little more up and down.
Chris Herndon returns this week, as does Sam Darnold for the New York Jets. And oh my God, I'm an Eagles fan, so I watched that Jets-Eagles game. Holy crap. That's like an expansion XFL team on offense with Luke Falk at quarterback. It's so bad. The line is not great. Le'Veon Bell, God bless him, he's still getting some carries, but help is on the way, Jets fans. You've got a lot of guys coming back, and if Darnold and Herndon are in the lineup, I think everybody gets a major uptick. Robbie Anderson, good guy to trade for maybe. Jamison Crowder, Le'Veon Bell. It all goes up. There's not a whole lot to talk about with Chris Herndon. He hasn't played. He's coming off a 4-game suspension, but look at their schedule, Dwain. So they're going to play Dallas, then the Patriots. Then you get Jaguars, Dolphins, Giants, Redskins, Raiders, Bengals, Dolphins again. I mean, that's a great schedule for the Jets.
Absolutely. Yeah, this team gets a major upgrade with Darnold. When you go from your starting quarterback to your third string quarterback, it's hard for pretty much any team. So they've lost their average margin of victory is minus 15.3. That's really, really bad in case people don't know. I mean, that's one of the worst in the league. That is the worst in the league besides the Dolphins. the Redskins are at minus 15.6. And then, you've got the Dolphins at minus 27.4. Way to go, Dolphins. Way to really, hang in there and play some football for your, for the state of Florida. So yeah, the Jets, are minus 15.3. So one of the worst three teams in the league. However, getting Sam Darnold back is going to be huge. And I would expect them in many of those games that you just named. I think that they will be competitive, and, sure. I think they'll win several of those games. I mean, they've been a bit unfortunate. They lost Quincy Enunwa. They had Herndon suspended early in the season, but now you get Herndon back. Now you get Sam Darnold back. Demaryius Thomas came back healthy this last week. He played 78% of the snaps, led the team with 35% of the targets, tied for first with Le'Veon Bell, who saw 35% of the targets. So Jamison Crowder, he was the guy that was kind of the odd man out this last weekend. He only saw 53% of the snaps, Drake. He only ran routes on 72% of the dropbacks. So that's something to monitor. This team could be looking to go to a little bit less 11 personnel, maybe use a little bit more 12, especially with Herndon coming back. This last week, you saw Ryan Griffin, Trevin Wesco, and Daniel Brown all involved from the tight end spot. So I want to keep an eye on Crowder. He's not a guy that you need to, drop or anything right now. But Robbie Anderson is a guy that if he's on your wire, and we talked about him last week, he absolutely should be, an ad. Does have a couple of tough games coming up, but getting Sam Darnold back is really huge for Robbie Anderson. And I think the same thing for Herndon, can be said, Drake.
Can't imagine many people out there are looking for a quarterback this week, but if you're looking for the wire, and if Minshew's out there, obviously he's a great play. I mean, the guy's like a top 11 quarterback right now. Kirk Cousins gets the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles have allowed 3 top 10 fantasy quarterbacks so far, and they, mind you, they played Luke Falk last week, so that obviously didn't happen. Let's talk a little bit about Cousins, and we can, get all of the Vikings in on this conversation here. 22 of 27, 306 and 2 touchdowns. The squeaky wheel got the grease, and that was Adam Thielen, while Stephon Diggs still was just nowhere to be found. 3 for 40.
The squeakiest wheel didn't get the grease. So here's the problem for Stephon Diggs. He was the squeakiest wheel, right? I mean, he's the guy saying, just trade me.
Practice.
Yeah, but here's his problem. Running routes on 78%, 83%, and 81% routes per dropback. And on an offense that is only dropping back to pass 49% on the year, and is running one of the lowest plays per minute at only 2, that just isn't going to cut it. So I mean, part of me gets, I would rather Stephon Diggs be a team player, but I guess I can see what he sees, which is he's basically, with the combination of all these things, means he's basically never on the field. He's probably playing, 20 snaps less a game than what he's used to, for the course of his career. So right now you can't even start Stephon Diggs. You basically need either the, Vikings to get into a shootout, which still doesn't guarantee you anything, because the week before they dropped back to pass 72% of the time. And even then Stephon Diggs couldn't get anything done, but he's only sitting at 18% of the targets for the year. 24% going to Adam Thielen. He saw 33% this last week. And here's the real thing. Dalvin Cook continues to see the target straight. He
went 6 this week still.
Yeah, 24%, 22%, 22%. So 19% of the targets on the season going to Dalvin Cook. That's more than Stephon Diggs. And so I don't see that really changing. I think the positive for Kirk Cousins owners is what Minnesota had hoped, which is less volume but more explosive plays, came true for Kirk Cousins this last week based on the play action, and all of those sort of things. They did try to get Diggs involved early in the game, Drake, but as Minnesota, jumped out and, was in control, of the game, this is a game that they won by 18 points. They just didn't continue to try to force it with Stephon Diggs.
I think, and I've told guys in our chat room here, we're getting a lot of questions. I think Diggs scores this week. You're going against a really bad, really banged up Eagles secondary. I think his speed is going to be an issue for a guy like Rasul Douglas, and he could make a play on the outside. So I'm calling that right now. Put it in the books. Stephon Diggs scores a touchdown this week.
If he does, trade him.
Yep. Not Stephon Diggs. Teddy Bridgewater. Really nice week last week. 314, 4 touchdowns versus the Jaguars. I said on Twitter, or I think during the game, I go, somebody after this season is going to sign Teddy Bridgewater to a big contract. And a year later, they're going to be so upset with themselves because they're going to be looking for a quarterback again. because Teddy Bridgewater is not great. That system's making him look good. Sean Payton's making him look good. He's got, nice players around him. But Teddy Bridgewater, I'm going to say this. Teddy Bridgewater stinks. He's a mediocre quarterback to me.
Yeah, it's just all underneath stuff. It's all the Saints scheme. Like if you go back and watch it, Teddy Bridgewater is never forced to make a big throw during that game. There's no crunch time, anything going on for Teddy Bridgewater. His average depth of target, for his 4 games, 6.6, 3.5, 6.0. This last week, a 7.3. He threw the 4 touchdowns, none of them over 40 yards. His attempts downfield are low. They continue to be low. This is all the Saints receivers catching balls, and doing stuff with it. He did have, 4 completions over 20 yards, this past week, but that's, it's not his typical thing. He did come through. He had that one longer pass to Ted Ginn, who was wide open on that play, Drake. Like I didn't even see anybody in the same TV screen as Ted Ginn. He did hit Jared Cook, on a nice little slant route into the end zone, in the first quarter. It might have been the second quarter. So, he made some plays, but really it was more about the scheme. It's not something where Teddy Bridgewater is making throws all over the field. He's operating within what Sean Payton wants him to do, and he's got playmakers making plays for him, and it worked out this past week.
So there's the look at the waiver wire. Nothing fantastic out there. If you were to rank these guys, Dwain, would you say
real quick, Drake, on the Saints, what I will say is what we have seen is Jared Cook has finally kind of emerged, as far as targets go. His snaps and his routes per dropback still aren't great. He's at 67% routes per, in his route per dropback on the year, which you'd like to see that around 75 or 80. But he's at 17% of the target share each of the last 2 weeks. So for the season, we know this is a Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara team. It was that way last year. The 2 of those guys account for 50% of the target straight, just between them. But the next guy in line right now is Jared Cook at 14%. So just worth calling out. He is starting to warm up a little bit. It can take some time, whenever you're the new player in a scheme and you're trying to learn exactly what it is your quarterback's looking for, what your coach is looking for, and I think he's a guy that could continue to pay dividends, as we move forward. He is a guy that also could have been dropped in some small and mid-sized leagues. I definitely saw him on the wire last week a couple of times.
Put these guys in order for me in terms of preference. I know every roster is different, but you got to put there's 3 guys on the wire. Would you rather have Pringle? Who am I looking at? Pringle, Everett, and Chase Edwards.
Chase Edmonds, you mean?
Chase Edwards, yes. I wrote it down wrong. I'll admit my mistake there.
It's okay.
I was watching wrestling
Drake,
and football last night, drinking beers at midnight doing this.
Yeah, again, this really does come back to the situation. I have no clue what the team needs, but if I just have to pick between one of these 3 guys for the rest of the season, it's Everett. If I've got to pick, for this week and I need a receiver, it's easily Pringle, because he gives me the most upside for this week. The rest of the season, Pringle's not going to return value unless, we get a longer term injury to somebody. And then as far as Chase Edmonds goes, if all of a sudden we don't know enough about David Johnson right now, but to me, all 3 of these guys, need to be owned in medium and deep size leagues. Again, it does depend on your roster. There's certain players you wouldn't be dropping for these, but these are 3 guys that easily, are in offenses that we like, or at least there's volume, to be had, whenever it comes to the Cardinals. We may not be crazy about the offense. But these are 3 guys that, if they do play and they have a role, they can score you fantasy points. They're actually worth owning. So, but the top would definitely be, Everett, just because what we've seen is he's potentially carving out, a role that for the rest of the season, while it may be up and down, it looks like he's working his way into being one of the guys they want to game plan around.
We gave you a couple of really good defenses last week. Hopefully you picked up either the Panthers or the Eagles. They came through for you. If you need somebody this week, you got the Chargers against Pittsburgh. They're starting a 3rd-string quarterback. Everybody's hurting Pittsburgh. It's not looking great. So as bad as San Diego, or I keep saying screw it, San Diego. I'm going with it. As bad as San Diego's banged up, check them out. Dallas going against the Jets. I get that Darnold's back. He could be rusty. You've got offensive line issues all up and down that New York Jets roster. And Carolina going up against Tampa Bay. They're going to be down 2 starting offensive linemen. Carolina defense looking really sharp. So there's 3 names who might be out there for you.
This is the easiest year ever to stream defense. Either you own the Patriots or you're streaming. That's it.
That's it.
Because there's so many bad quarterbacks in play right now. It's just people can't carry all these defenses. There's too many. I'm literally in the teams I don't own the Patriots. I'm switching it every single week.
Sure. And there's a lot of guys in your leagues who might not pay attention, and then they'll wait until Friday and go, "Oh yeah, I need a defense. Let me pick somebody up." I'm sure
I have several interesting guys to talk about, Drake. If you want to get into some trend stuff.
Yes, I would. I want to get into trends and players who are maybe on people's teams, and they're like, "Oh my God, what do I do with this guy? Do I trade him? Do I drop him? Do I stick him on my bench?" So let's talk about some of those guys, and let's start right at the top with Todd Gurley, because people invested a first or second round pick into Mr. Gurley. He's getting receptions. I get it. He's getting a couple garbage touchdowns, but I am still I want to sell high on this guy while he still has a great name.
Yeah. So here's what I'm seeing with Gurley. The first thing people have to do, set aside where you drafted him, whichever side of the argument you're on, whether you're on Drake's side, which is sell, or whether you're on the hold side or you're on the buy side, doesn't matter. Set aside what you thought he was coming into the season and just listen to what the data is telling us. Here are his snap rates, Drake, over the last 3 weeks: 73%, 75%, 93%. Here are his percentage of team rushing attempts over the last 3 weeks: 58% in a blowout loss. They rested him. He only had 45% this last week. He had 83% of the team's rushing attempts. Inside the 5, remember early in the season, Malcolm Brown, he gone. He ain't doing crap. Gurley's getting it every week now. Gurley week, 100% of the rushing attempts inside the 5 over the last 3 weeks for the team. Routes per dropback up to the season high, 64% this last week. Targets, 15 and 10% over the last 2 weeks. Here's what I'm wondering, Drake. As these aren't the same Rams. And so I think Sean McVay is under pressure to try to figure out ways to win. And I do believe that potentially some of the plan around preserving Gurley may be going out the window.
Do you worry about those bad guards, though? Because, they're affecting Jared Goff with all that pressure up the middle. And
sure, I worry about him. But Todd Gurley scored 2 touchdowns last week. It's still going to be one of the top 12 offenses in the league, even though they're not as good. Yes, we've been worried. We've been talking about these 2 guards, and they've actually changed. We've been talking about the interior of this offensive line since like week 11 of last week when the Lions exposed them. So we know this is a problem, but it's nothing new. It's something you and I have been talking about for a long time. Here's what I'm seeing with Gurley is there is a potential silver lining here where they're just about to just say, you know what, screw it. And think of their division. Mm-hmm. Think of where, the 49ers are, right? What are they? 4-0. You think about where the Seahawks are. They've only got one loss after, beating, the Rams this last week. The Rams are in a tough situation. So their mind could shift from, let's preserve Gurley for later in the season to thinking there may not be a later in the season unless we get Todd Gurley going right now. Now, just to be fair and balanced, even though Gurley had 83% of the carries last week, Drake, it didn't really mean he had more carries than what we had been used to seeing. His attempts have been 14, 16, 14. He went down to 5 in that blowout, which was also the game where he saw 10 targets, though, so they kind of balanced that out that way. Last week, he still only had 15 carries. So it will be interesting this weekend to see what happens. Is it the carries that actually go up because they want to give him that higher percentage? Or did that percentage just work out to be that way because the way that game script went? They still monitored him. They still kept him at his 15 to 20 opportunity range. That'll be what's worth, really checking out. Let's see what happens this next week with it. But if I'm a Todd Gurley owner, the thing that I'm doing is just resetting expectations. At least now I know I can predictably say he's going to get 15 to 20 opportunities each week, and I know he's going to get the high leverage touches inside the 5. You can live on that in fantasy football this year. In 2019, you can live on that. That's a solid. He's not your RB. He's not going to be an RB1 right now unless we see this percentage hold up, and then all of a sudden, he gets 23, 24 carries. I think where you'll still see Gurley come off the field is if the Rams get out to a big lead. I think they'll cap his touches that way. Or if they're in a big blowout loss, they're going to cap him. But if they're in these types of games, which mostly they've been in so far this season, Drake, which is they lost last week by 1. They lost by 15 the week before, which was his lowest performance, as far as touches. And then if you look at the week before, they won by 1 score 7. The week before, they won by 5. The week before, they won by 3. And those types of games, which it seems like they're kind of destined to play in now that they're not as dominant, we could see more Gurley. So just you got to look at both sides of it, with Gurley. But I think he's still easily an RB2 right now, knowing that he's getting those carries inside the 5.
What worries me is the game, because they're obviously throwing the ball 50 times a game now. What worries me is when he's not set up on the doorstep as he has been the last 2 weeks, because percentage-wise is one thing, but actual number of carries and total touches is way down over the last few years for Todd Gurley.
But that's why you gotta set it aside, though, at this point, Drake. Yeah, I mean, what do we do? Just keep repeating that over and over each week? At this point, it is what it is. I will take Todd Gurley at 15 to 20 touches a week in an offense that's not top 3 anymore, but is still top 12. And I know when they get in the red zone, he's getting it. That makes him an RB2. I mean, that's what he is. Now, he's not an RB1, but that's why I preface this whole thing with just set aside what you may have thought Todd Gurley was coming in. Right now,
capital can't be brought into the conversation.
Gurley, if you can go get something big for him, do it. If you can't, if you have to give him away, don't. That's basically where I'm at on Todd Gurley. Essentially, he's a hold.
Let's look at a couple of other running backs here. And the San Diego / Los Angeles Chargers have a couple of really good running backs. And Austin Eckler caught 15 balls for 86 yards this week. Melvin Gordon getting a little more incorporated into the offense. Still didn't look, great or dominant, kind of sluggish out there. But again, the guy hasn't played. This is basically his preseason. What did you see from the Chargers running backs? And it's obvious Austin Eckler's not going away.
Yeah, to be fair, I didn't think either one of them looked good. I didn't even think Eckler looked good. I mean, he caught a bunch of dump down passes, which is great for fantasy.
They have no receivers anymore. So
I feel like what this was is the Broncos had their number. But here's the bad thing for Eckler. He only had 19% of the rushing attempts. He did stay around as a receiver. What I worry about is when Hunter Henry comes back, really how do they make all that work? Because he played 65% of the snaps and Melvin Gordon played 45%. So they clearly had overlap between them. I haven't had a chance to go back and watch all of their plays. I don't know how much Eckler continues to get that treatment once Hunter Henry, comes back into the picture. We'll have to see. Maybe he will stay involved. But 75% of the rushing attempts went to Melvin Gordon. So what we could see is more of a traditional way that we used to think about running backs by committee when the lines weren't as blurry as they are today, on a week-to-week basis. We could really see more of a situation where just Melvin Gordon is the lead ball carrier and Austin Eckler is the guy that comes in on passing downs. The problem with that is we know that Melvin Gordon's also a good receiver out of the backfield. His routes per drop back were at 38%, and he saw 13% of the targets. So for me, if I can sell Austin Eckler right now, I'm doing it. I believe that Melvin Gordon's going to continue to eat in. I do think Eckler will keep a role, but he's going to get to a point. He's not going to have 15 catches every week. What's more likely is you're going to be hoping for 3 to 5. Maybe 6 or 7 is going to be a good week. If you can sell based on this narrative that Austin Eckler is still going to be this heavily involved in this offense moving forward, you should be able to get something really good for him. Mm-hmm. And I would go move him right now. Melvin Gordon, on the other hand, if you drafted him, I mean, you just have to be thankful for what you're getting, at this point. But I think Gordon will work his way up to at least 50% of the routes per drop back. So almost an even split with Eckler. And I think you're going to continue to see him, dominate the rushing attempts somewhere between 60 and 75% of the carries. Inside the 5, he got the carry this week as well. Eckler did not. So I think it's just something where Melvin Gordon's going to continue to see his role grow. He's not somebody you can really go sell high right now. You could potentially go buy Melvin Gordon, but if somebody drafted him and spent a high draft pick and they've held on to him this long, they're going to be hard to try to it'll be hard to trade with that type of owner. You always try, but you don't want to overpay for him. But Eckler is definitely, you want to go sell him right now. I don't see a way. Really, I think probably fortunate if you're an Eckler owner to get one last big game out of him like this. I would definitely try to move him.
Jalen Samuels earlier today was reported that he had a knee scope and is going to miss a month of games. That opens things up for James Conner. Benny Snell now becomes the immediate handcuff to Conner. Conner out-carried Samuels 14-3 this week, didn't do a whole lot with it. The Steelers offense is kind of a mess. And now you're looking at Devlin Hodges at quarterback for the Steelers this week. I've gotten a question in the chat room here. A guy's looking Freeman or Conner rest of the season, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on Conner and this Steelers offense under whoever Devlin Hodges is.
Yeah, I think you still have to go Freeman rest of the season just because you've got a quarterback that's still upright and Matt Ryan, and that's huge. If you have a viable quarterback, that's major. That's a major thing, for your running game right now in Pittsburgh. It's like you said, I mean, eventually maybe we get Mason Rudolph back, but without Ben Roethlisberger, that's just, right out of the gate, that was a big problem, for James Conner. The good news for Conner, and I don't have it right in front of me, Drake, is his schedule does soften here coming. He's got some really nice matchups coming against some teams where they probably will be able to run the ball. James Conner is a guy, he's another guy that honestly I would try to sell high, especially if I can get a big week out of him, getting all the carries with just Benny Snell working in and now less of Jalen Samuels. If you get you get one of these matchups coming up that are soft and he goes off for a big game, that makes him a really great, sell high candidate, especially again, if you can go target, a receiver that really helps your team, that type of scenario, that's something that, and James Conner, I hate it because this is a guy that, looking at him this preseason, we really like, a great offensive line, those things are all still intact, but when you lose your quarterback, it just creates a rocky road. I mean, think about it, Drake. Think of all the teams with crappy quarterbacks. Do you want any of the running games on those teams?
It's tough. I mean,
look at Joe Mixon. Look what he's dealing with. And he even has at least, Andy Dalton could be semi-viable, but I mean, even he's struggling. So these guys that don't have quarterbacks, man, it's tough because if you look at it, the teams that do have quarterbacks, even when they're splitting carries between two guys, you can get by.
Here's Connor's schedule upcoming. So they've got the Chargers this week, then a bye week. So probably you'll get Mason Rudolph back after that for the Dolphins, Colts, Rams, Browns, Bengals, Browns, Cardinals.
So it's not really that great. I guess I probably gravitated to seeing that Dolphins team. I mean, they're the Bengals. Those are good matchups, but that Dolphins game, will be really big, for James Conner. But he's a guy that if you can sell high on this news, I absolutely would right now. And again, I would prefer Devonta Freeman still over him right now because I prefer Matt Ryan 10 times over to Mason Rudolph, or whoever this other guy that you just named is. I already forgot his name.
Devlin Hodges.
My bad.
How about if you're starting one of these two rookies, okay? You've got Miles Sanders or David Montgomery. Neither one setting the world on fire. Luckily, Sanders is getting a little work in the passing game to kind of save his PPR value. But there's owners out there who drafted them early in drafts as saying, hey, this is going to be my RB2. And now both of them they're shaky. They're not really options you'd even want to flex at this point.
Yeah, I mean, Miles Sanders, hit a season high of 45% routes per drop back. So that gives him, that helps his floor each week. But Jordan Howard continues to see, the majority of the rushing work. So 45% each of the last 2 weeks.
Peterson says he's going to get more.
Yeah, Peterson, we don't believe anything Peterson says when it comes to running backs because he just lies. He just lies through his teeth, Drake. We know he can't help himself. He's got to use 3. He'd like to use – what he really meant, Drake, is they're probably going to get Corey Clement back involved.
Yeah, Sproles is out for a few weeks with a quad injury. So
yeah, so that helps Miles Sanders. Jordan Howard is a guy that he's getting the high leverage looks. And so now that the Eagles offense is really starting to get going – Jordan Howard's still the guy that I want to own because I feel like I get a shot at a touchdown every single week. Miles Sanders he isn't touching the ball inside the 5. But if you own Miles Sanders or David Montgomery right now, what are you going to do? You can't do anything. You've just got to hold them. You can't sell them for anything, because the whole idea of, wow, they cost a 3rd or a 5th round. I saw people taking Montgomery in the 3rd, but for the most part, they were 4th and 5th round picks in a lot of drafts, sometimes 6th round, for Miles Sanders. The whole thought process behind, oh, that's what they cost in the draft before. They don't have a name like Todd Gurley, so they don't still carry name value. They're just rookie runners. Nobody's going to give you anything for them. So you just have to hold them. You just got to be patient. If you're in a super small league, I mean, you can talk about letting them go. But I mean, the good thing, I would rather own David Montgomery, if I've got to choose between the two. I think Miles Sanders is actually the player that I like more, even though he can't read a freaking zone block to save his life. It's so terrible. It's gross. But David Montgomery will make 72 guys miss. It's up. I think last week I said it was like 26, Drake. He makes 72 guys miss and he gains 1 yard. It's the ugliest thing I've ever seen from a standpoint of actually moving forward on a football field. Now, the good news for him, though, is his snaps are intact. He's over 65% the second week in a row. He gets all the rushing work inside the 5. He's 100%, Drake. All 7 of the attempts inside the 5 are David Montgomery's this past year. For this year, he punched one in this last week. His routes per dropback are slightly declining, but we've told people from the beginning, Tariq Cohen isn't going away. And as Anthony Miller and the other receivers, Trey Burton, the tight end, gets healthy, we would see less Tariq Cohen at receiver, which would mean Cohen would be operating from the backfield more, which would limit Montgomery. But Montgomery right now, I would still rather, I would own him just because we know that the team is trying to get him involved. Eventually, he's going to score 2 or 3 touchdowns, Drake. I do think Montgomery is actually a guy that you can flex if you need to. Whereas, with Miles Sanders, you can flex him if you need to, but I really don't want to.
Sanders' upcoming schedule, by the way, is not great at all. At Minnesota, at Dallas, at Buffalo.
At Dallas, that's great. You can gash the Cowboys for the Cowboys here's a bad trend for the Cowboys.
Yeah, let's talk about them and Aaron Jones quickly.
Well, Marlon Mack did this to them last year, like week 11 or 12 when the Colts came to Dallas. I mean, or Dallas may have been there, but either way, they couldn't stop him, and it was all of these interior runs. And then you saw Aaron Jones do it, this weekend. Well, guess who did it to him in the playoffs last year? The Rams, who've sucked inside, which we just discussed already, for several, for the last 10 games that the Rams have played, their interior blocking and their interior line play has not been good. And C.J. Anderson ran all over the Cowboys in the playoffs last year. So teams that are committed to trying to run the ball against the Cowboys should do it because they're not built to stop it. They're built to play from ahead. They're built with rangy, speedy players that are there to cover the perimeter. You don't want to attack really outside on the Cowboys, even though they lost gap contained several times this last weekend, including Leighton Vander Esch, who was amazing as a rookie, has really struggled, with that, over a couple of games. So
that's what I want to ask you. What the hell's going on? You've got these 2 stud linebackers here, and people are running down their throat.
Yeah, well, they're not really built as run-stopping linebackers. To be honest, they're tackle-you-in-space kind of guys, but you ask them to make plays behind the line of scrimmage and, move downhill. It's just something that they haven't been as good at, this season, and we saw that start happening last season. So thank God. I mean, I'm thankful for Aaron Jones. I own him a lot, so needed this performance, and I own him a ton in DFS. He's my most owned running back this last weekend, so and it was all based on this. It was all based on I knew the Packers would stick with the run enough and that Dallas – was going to struggle to stop them because any team that commits to running the ball against the Cowboys inside is usually successful.
Last guy I want to ask you about here is Mike Evans, who put up a 0.0 performance against the Saints. I mean, what can you say? These things happen in fantasy football. On the other side,
it's Lattimore.
Lattimore's fantastic. Godwin went 7 for $125 and 2 on the opposite side, but I think Evans is a guy. Go buy him today if you can. But
yes, go buy. This is just. I mean, Lattimore was elite in his rookie year. He struggled with some things in his second year, took a step back, and he is back. Jair Alexander, on the other hand, the talk of him being a top 3 corner, forget it. Amari Cooper just roasted him all day. Now, to be fair, we're higher on Amari Cooper than many other, shows and folks in the industry just because of how much, I've had to study Amari Cooper being a Dallas Cowboy fan.
I hate the Cowboys. I drafted Amari Cooper in like the 3rd round of my biggest league of the year.
When he's healthy, he's uncoverable, Drake. I mean, his on-field application, short, inside, outside, intermediate timing routes, deep routes, post routes, run after the catch, all of it. I mean, the thing he's not elite at is, 50-50 jump balls, but he's at least adequate at that. I mean, literally, he's very similar to Julio Jones, but he's a better separator. Not quite as good after the catch as Julio, but still very good. Two players both from Alabama, but Amari Cooper is elite. I mean, if people don't believe it now, I don't know what to tell them. He creates separation, against everyone. Now, who's the one guy that really played him well so far? The guy that just shut Mike Evans down. Lattimore the week before. So,
top five corner.
Yes, top 5, maybe top 3.
Yeah.
He's a definite avoid. He will travel with the best receiver. You want no part of it. So good luck, DJ Chark. All you DJ Chark lovers, it ain't happening this weekend. If they put Lattimore on him, which I would guess, I'd say it's a 99% chance because that Chark's the only way that they can win that game. Yeah, I don't know that Chark might catch 2 balls, all game, and they'll be on the ones where just so happens that Lattimore's not covering him.
That's crazy. Well, that's about going to wrap it up here, Dwayne. Any final thoughts here heading into week 6?
Just quickly, because a guy we touched on a couple times, in the recent weeks, Sony Michel, Drake, the interesting thing with him is really that the backup fullback, Jacob Johnson, saw 42% of the plays. So what does that mean, Drake? It means more 21 personnel, which is really helping Sony Michel because we know that is the personnel package that he really works from the most. So that's helping him. So after only seeing 33% of the rushing attempts in week 3 and us, basically in full on panic mode because they had lost James Devlin for the year and they don't really have, 2 quality tight ends. It was just, how are they going to really run these heavy sets? Well, for the last 2 weeks, Sony Michel, 74%, 59% of the rushing attempts. So holding in there. If you're in a deep league, Reggie Bonifon should be owned 2 times this season. We have seen McCaffrey, actually get off the field and someone else get carries, and both times it has been this kid. And he came up with a big play. Yes, Jordan Scarlett's on the roster. He could see some work if for some reason Christian McCaffrey were to go down. But this is the guy that can do the things McCaffrey does, and obviously he's not McCaffrey, so don't take that, out of context. Sure. But he's the guy that can act as a receiver and do more of the things that McCaffrey does. So Bonifon is a guy that, man, people should really, if you're in a super deep league, he's one of those priority handcuffs that people should own. Mike Williams still going to have a huge week. We talk people up on Will Fuller week after week after week after week. Drake, Mike Williams, he missed week 4 because of back spasms, but the week before that, he had really good utilization trends. He was right back at it this week. He had 23% of the targets. Mike Williams, his biggest game of his career is coming, folks. It's going to be here soon. Michael Gallup, was out for 2 weeks with the meniscus tear, stepped right back in, played 86% of the snaps, Drake, 88% routes per dropback, 30% of the target, all season highs coming off of an injury. He's over 20% of the targets every week. He is clearly by, head and shoulders above. He is the number 2 on this team. Just good. Real quick, if for some reason, Devontae Adams misses this week, folks, don't be afraid of Geronimo Allison. He played 86% of the snaps. There were some concerns that he might just only play out of 11 personnel again, and maybe Kumaro would take the snaps out of 12 and 21. That didn't happen. So if the Packers are in a situation where they can't just sit there and run the ball all day, Geronimo Allison is going to be a guy you can use for a week if Devontae Adams is out. Lastly, Drake, one more. Anthony Miller. For the Bears. So, the Bears aren't, and they're on bye, so you don't have to do it this week. And it's not really a passing offense we want to get involved with. It's stuck, kind of a neutral right now. But here are his routes per dropback: 62%, 74%, 86%. Remember, he had an ankle injury after week 3 of the preseason. He's just now
before that.
And that was last year, but he's just now getting back to health. He got 23% of the targets, which was tied for second on the team this week. So he's a guy for folks to remember. And then just for fun, one last one, Drake. Matt Lacoste for the Patriots. We know they just decided, nope, we're not going to do this Ben Watson thing. Lacoste had been dealing with an ankle injury. So he was finally really getting a full complement of snaps this last weekend. He played 94%. He ran a route on 89% of those, and he was targeted 9%. The other tight end, on the team, caught the touchdown in the end zone. So that's
give me a break.
Yeah, he's really just more of a special teams player. Lacoste is the guy. And with all the injuries, we've got Edelman dealing with an injury. Now you got Dorsett, a little bit banged up. Matt Lacoste and Jacoby Myers, is Myers is really similar to Bonifon. Anytime that the Patriots have had a receiver that's been hurt, Myers has stepped in. So in both weeks, when Edelman went down, he jumped in. And then last week when Dorsett went down, he jumped in. So those are two guys just to think about if you're in super deep leagues. They could have some volume coming their way in the Patriots passing attack in the very near future.
And Sony Michel, speaking of Patriots, 18 routes run, career high. Previous high was 8 in the Super Bowl. So maybe Sony getting a little love in the passing game. So that's going to do it for us here at the Fantasy Football Hustle. For Dwain McFarland of Establish the Run, I am Brian Drake, fightingchancefantasy.com. Go read those excellent sites and visit those great people. And we'll see you guys next week. Check us out on Twitter at Drake Fantasy, at Dwain McFarland, at FF Hustle. Good luck out there, folks, and never stop hustling.